brothers and sisters at Nesville Mennonite Church, I urge you, friends, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. This is your spiritual act of worship. Love must be sincere. Hate what is evil, cling to what is good. Be devoted to one another in love. Honor one another above yourselves. Never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor serving the Lord. Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, and faithful in prayer. Share with God's people who are in need. Practice hospitality. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Mourn with those who mourn. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be proud, but be willing to associate with people of low position. Do not be conceited. Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everybody. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Do not take revenge, my friends, but leave room for God's wrath, for it is written, "It is mine to avenge, I will repay," says the Lord. On the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. The faithful servant in Christ, Paul.
You know, there's a lot of things that people believe about us as Christians. A lot of things that people say about Christians. Can we hit number 7? Is that on? There we go. Did some searching. You know, I didn't need to do a whole lot of searching, honestly, to figure out what people think about Christians. You can search the internet. These are some things that I found. One is that Christians are boring, that they are sheltered, and that they are out of touch with reality. You ever heard that? That issues of faith are irrelevant to our day-to-day life. That religion is about trying to make complicated and mysterious worlds seem neat and tidy. Some think that Christianity is like a hobby that diverts people's attention from the way things really are. Have any of you heard those things or something similar? Yeah? This is going to be a participatory sermon. Actually, 2 times during the sermon, I'm going to ask you to talk to your neighbor and to have a little bit of conversation. You won't have to have a whole lot, don't worry. Just for those of you that are not so much into talking to your neighbor, or more reflective, or are interested in resting in the Lord during my sermon, just feel free to just cross your eyes and look forward and don't make eye contact with your neighbor. And then they'll know that you would just like to reflect, all right? So those are some things that people say or believe about Christianity, but the truth is something different. Of course, we all know the truth is something very different. The truth is that there is no one, no people, no group of people, no singular person in this world who is to be filled with more potential life and emotion and passion than a Christian. We are to be filled with fire, with zeal. We are to be a torch, not a candle in this world. On our salvation, this salvation that we've been talking about for these last couple of weeks in Romans chapter 11, is to work its way out in relevant and vital and passionate ways every single day of our lives. That's what we've been learning here in Romans. And our faith in following of Jesus is to be evident and loud in every relationship that we have. This is my torch. This is my torch, and I keep it on my desk, and it reminds me of what my faith in Jesus Christ is to be like. It actually reminds me of Paul. Paul was a pretty zealous dude, and this is the kind of passion he had for Jesus. This is the kind of fire that he pursued. It's a fire that actually makes some people nervous. Because it kind of fills a room, doesn't it? So it's much better if you turn it down, right? Much better if it's just sort of nice and sweet and light there. We'll get back to that in a little bit. I think I'll actually turn it off. It's making probably people nervous. The trustees don't want me to burn down the church. No, they do not. That's the truth about Christianity that we need to embrace, and it's the truth about faith that Paul is trying to get across to us. And he's trying to help us to understand what the goal of our faith is, what the goal of Christianity is. And this might make some of you nervous, but the truth that Paul is telling the church in Romans and what we are to embrace is that the goal of Christianity is not that we sin less frequently. The goal of faith and following Jesus Christ is that we learn to love more fervently. That's what faith is all about. That's what all of these 11 chapters of Romans is trying to help us to understand. It's what all of this talk about trying to follow the law and not trying to follow the law, and how it just, nobody's getting it. Nobody's able to be perfect. Even Paul, who's a Christian, says the things I want to do, I don't do, and the things I don't want to do, I end up doing. What in the world are we, what's going on? Who's going to help with all of this? And he says, thank God for Jesus Christ. Thank God for Jesus Christ. Why? Because this faith that we're following isn't about so much sinning less. It's about loving more. And what happens when we learn to love more? We just naturally sin less. We just naturally hurt ourselves and hurt each other and hurt God less. We are to pursue love passionately. And that's really what this chapter 12 is all about. You know, the statistics actually show that there's not a huge amount of difference in behavior between Christians and non-Christians. The divorce rate's about the same. The use of pornography is about the same. We as Christians have about the same amount of pain as everybody else. We are on about the same amount of antidepressants as everyone else. There's a lot that's similar. But what's different, what is different, what we do see is different, is that somehow in the midst of that brokenness that we all share as humanity, Christians that really decide to follow Jesus and pursue love begin to do incredibly great and awesome things in the world, even though they are broken people, even though they have issues and problems. If you look at our history and our story, most of the hospitals, most of the colleges and schools, most of the transformation in the mental health field, most of the humanitarian efforts, even though many of them have been secularized, most of them started by Christians wanting to love other people and make the world a better place. Pursuing this idea of loving the community of faith and loving our neighbor. And that is what is different statistically. That our love is more fervent. Now, of course, I'm not suggesting that we sin more so that grace can abound. That's the question that Paul, of course, says and asks, the response to him talking about these kinds of things in chapter 6, verse 1. And of course, that's not what I'm saying. But I am saying that we must fervently love, and Paul is trying to encourage us to do that. You see, for some reason, we have focused more on this sin thing than on the love thing, and as a result, Jesus and the church has an image problem. We have an image problem. It's not a new image problem. Have you ever heard of Frances Nightingale? How many of you heard Frances Nightingale? Florence, yeah. Yeah. See, that was a test. That was part of the participation thing. Anybody heard of Frances Nightingale? A couple of us. The sister of Florence. She did good stuff too. Okay, just chalk it up to the pain meds. She, incredible woman. During the Crimean Wars in England, she was a nurse, and she actually sensed a calling from God to be a nurse. And at the time, in the hospitals, the veteran hospitals, there was 42% mortality in those hospitals. And as a result of what she did, the mortality rate went down to 2% in those hospitals. And what she was doing was an expression of her calling and understanding of how she needed to love her neighbor and maybe even some of her enemies by going into these hospitals and tending to them. And interestingly, she said this about this whole image problem of Jesus. She said, people talk about imitating Christ and imitate him in the little trifling formal things, such as washing feet and saying his prayer and so on. But if anyone attempts the real imitation of him, there is no bounds to the outcry with which the presumption of that person is condemned. She's talking about what happens when we really get in our skin and in our bodies this idea of passionately following Jesus. When we become a torch and not just a candle in the world, and that somehow makes people nervous, and many times they try to push us down and to shut it down. Not exactly sure why. Maybe it makes people nervous. Maybe it makes people feel inadequate. I don't know why. But it is most certainly the call of Christ for us to pursue love more than other things. For when we do, marvelous things happen. This is what was said about Florence Nightingale. She is a ministering angel without any exaggeration in these hospitals. And as her slender form glides quietly along each corridor, every poor fellow's face softens with gratitude at the sight of her. When all the medical officers have retired for the night, and silence and darkness have settled down upon those miles of prostrate sick, she may be observed alone, with a little lamp in her hand, making her solitary rounds. Fervently loving, bringing healing and hope to people. That is the image of who we are to be as we follow the rule of love that Paul talks about in chapter 12. If you go ahead and open that up, I'd appreciate it. We're going to look at that here for just a few moments. Romans 12 outlines how our salvation is to impact every kind of relationship that we have. This rule of love, this coming to terms with we are all broken humanity, and part of what Jesus wants us to do is to live out of that into the life of love. And we are to do that both in the good relationships that we have and in the bad ones. And we are to do it both in the relationships inside the community of faith and outside the community of faith. The rule of love mandates that as followers of Jesus, we focus on what draws us together more than what separates us. It demands that we focus on building unity in the midst of our diversity. For Paul and the Roman faith community, it was the issues of the Jews and the Gentiles, of salvation by following the law or by following grace, strength versus weakness, perfection versus brokenness. And the issues, frankly, that we face are not too far different, are they? Paul's plea in the first 11 chapters is for us as Christians to step away from our judgmental, prejudicial, self-centered, and self-righteous attitudes and instead recognize that we all need Jesus to be the human race that we all long to be. For Paul, love covers a multitude of sins. And actually, Peter said this in chapter 4 of Peter 4:8. And it is the rule of love and grace that is going to make our Christian community possible. In chapter 12, verse 2, Paul speaks, and it's this verse that we're talking about, of the pattern of the world. The pattern of the world. And so many times we understand that what he's talking about is the pattern of the world is the pattern of sin, right? Don't we? Many times we think that's what he's talking about. But really, that's not what he's talking about. What he's talking about when he talks about the pattern of the world is that the pattern of the world is that as humanity, we allow our differences to separate us and to motivate us to hate and hurt each other, rather than letting our common broken humanity draw us together in love as a community around the lordship of Jesus Christ. The pattern of the world is that we allow our differences to separate us, rather than allowing the lordship of Jesus Christ to unify us in the midst of our diversity. I need to clarify one more statement, and then I'm going to ask you to talk to each other. There's this interesting phrase here in chapter 12 as he begins to talk about what's going on. And he says, love must be sincere, verse 9. Hate what is evil and cling to what is good. Hate what is evil and cling to what is good. And we have traditionally, I think, understood that as hating evil in the sense of hating sin, right? Am I close? Nods? Okay, some nods here. Okay, maybe not. Maybe you've understood it this way. Maybe you've understood it like this. Hate, the word is apostageo, is to separate from. Okay? We are to separate from poneros, okay? Which is the things that bring toils, annoyances, perils, of time full of peril to Christian faith and steadfastness, causing pain and trouble. We are to separate ourselves from the things in our community, which he's going to go on and tell us about, that cause us pain and trouble. And basically, that's our separation from each other. That's our judgmentalness. That's our persecution. That's our lack of being at peace with one another. We're to separate ourselves from that, move away from those things, and instead cling to what is good. Koleo, to glue together, to cement, to fasten together, to join oneself to what? Agathos, good, pleasant, agreeable, joyful, and happy. We are to join ourselves to one another in a happy, healthy, peaceful, joyful community that is celebrating the lordship of Jesus Christ. That is what he is talking about. So it's not really out of context. It is a statement about community that he is making. So Paul goes on in verses 9 through 13, and please go ahead and look at that. He goes on to make these statements, to be devoted to one another in brotherly love, to honor one another above yourselves, to never be lacking in zeal, but to keep your spiritual fervor, serving the Lord, to be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer, and to share with God's people who are in need, and to practice hospitality. These are the things that God invites us to do as we pursue love fervently. And you know what? I know that those things are happening here in the church at Nashville. One of the ways that we can encourage one another is to share those experiences. Share how we have experienced this kind of love in Christian community. So what I'd like for you to do right now is just take a minute and turn to your neighbor. And there's a couple of suggestions here of what you might share. Share a time that you felt loved, or someone had your back, or you felt honored. Time that you felt inspired, on fire for Jesus, right, by someone. Serving God, a time that joy was sparked, or you received help, or you received hospitality. Turn to your neighbor. Share a story like that, or share a story when maybe you saw that happen. Okay? So go ahead, take a minute or two and do that. By the amount of conversation that's going on, it sounds like that we're doing a pretty good job of loving one another fervently, about embracing this idea of what it ought to be as Christian community. And boy, I love to hear all the wonderful things and the wonderful stories that were shared. And I would encourage you to continue to do that. You may have heard some things that inspired you. Maybe gave you an idea of what you might do to show love, or what you might need as well to experience in the Christian community. But Paul isn't just talking about what happens here in the church. He's also talking about how we also love the people that are not so lovely. You are all so lovely, you know. Probably fairly easy to love the person you're sitting next to. But what about those people that aren't so lovely? What about all those people that might really give you a hard time, might try to, rather than trying to spur you on and get your torch going stronger, maybe they want to rain on your parade or your wedding, you know? What about those kinds of people? Well, Paul says that there's some instruction there. We're to love them too. That's the basis of it. We're to offer them love and grace and mercy. We're to do the same kinds of things that Jesus did to us when we were as well sinners. And he loved us, and he died for us, and gave himself up for us, extended himself to us, offered that other cheek even though we slapped one of them. These are the kinds of things that Paul is encouraging us to do, and to do that fervently and passionately. So I'd like for you to think about, just for a moment, a time that you did not repay evil for evil. A a time that you celebrated someone else's success, a time that you cried over someone else's loss, a time you made an effort to live at peace with someone else, maybe a time that you chose not to take revenge, a time that you fed an enemy, potentially, maybe a time you gave a drink to an enemy, or a time when you overcame evil with good. You know, it might seem that these things are impossible to practice in the real world. And certainly, maybe we think that it's impossible to actually live like this and be in business, you know, to be in commerce. Thanks to, I can't remember who gave this to me. Rachel Brubaker, maybe? I think it was. Quentin Fry was one of the founders, one of the directors of Turkey Hill. And he actually took Romans 12, verses 11 through 21, and turned them into his business plan for Turkey Hill. And gave this to his employees and said, this is how we are going to do business. This is how we're going to do business. And so he wrote this. Work hard at your business, but keep a proper balance between your fervor for it and the Lord's business, which you are also doing. The hope of success spurs you hopefully on, but watch out. There will be many times when you lose money, so pray continually. This formula permits you to have money to give to people in need and to entertain others in your home and in your church. Bless those who levy taxes and controls. To those who take your customers, your market, and your money, don't get angry about it. Be happy when the other fellow is successful. Be sympathetic when with those who are having a hard time of it. Don't get high-minded and stuck up when you succeed, but act just as though you had failed and were poor. Don't think your success was all because of you. Don't try to beat the Sharpie salesman or the businessman because he pulled a fast deal on you. Let your dealing have an honest ring to your employees, your customers, and your fellow businessmen. Some customers you can never satisfy, and some inspectors you can never please, but keep trying without getting huffy. Dear fellow businessmen and women, don't think you must win every time. If you lose, don't try to make it up with the next deal. The Lord will take care of those characters. Instead, do him a good turn. That will really roust him out. Don't let evil cause you to fail. Let good make you successful. You see, there are ways that we can apply these things in very practical and meaningful ways. And that is the hope of what we do. The goal of the gospel is not so much that we sin less frequently, but that we love more fervently in all of our relationships, whether it be in the church, in our families, on the playground as kids, at work, courtroom, wherever it might be. May God inspire us by his love so that we might love in his ways.